I'm excited about what we're about to experience together. For those of you who are here on Easter Sunday, Tom was one of our guest speakers on Easter, and his refrain from that Sunday was, "I am still here, and I'm still here." And he expressed a litany of the things that has happened to him, around him, through him, and that through it all, something kept him here and kept him moving forward. When I was speaking to him 2 weeks ago in preparation for this, he asked me, "What was it that made you ask me for this interview?" And I said, "I wanted to know more. I wanted to know more about what you've learned in your spiritual journey that keeps you here and that keeps you involved in unity, in spiritual teachings, and keeps you keeping on making a difference in the world." So without further ado, I'd like to bring up and introduce you once again to Mr. Thomas LeNoble. Why don't you have a seat over here?
Thank you so much, everyone in the room and online, and happy Pride to all of our LGBTQ plus community and all our allies. Hi.
Hi. Welcome to the Oprah chairs.
Yes.
It's a great way to have Sunday service, right? Super Soul Unity Sunday.
Yes.
Right? And so one of the major things that we talked about also was that there is a quote, and we talked about New Thought. So you were not raised in New Thought. You didn't raise your hand when I asked the question earlier. What was the religion you were raised in?
I was raised a Methodist. My mother was a charter member of our church and taught Sunday school for 28 years. And so I was in church every Sunday.
Amazing. And you found New Thought teachings.
I did, probably 35 years ago.
Yeah.
I started in D.C., and then here I ended up at the Unity Christ Church on Ocean Avenue, and moved from there and landed here.
So one of the things that also Tom said to me, there's a question he asked someone that I will get to, but I wanted it as the frame for the whole interview, and I guess you figured that by my talk title, is what have you learned about love? And it's a question he asked someone that we all know of, right? And so I wanted to use it as a frame for all of us. In our journey, in our spiritual journey here, what have we learned about love? Right? And the questions I have for you. So one of the things you've shared with me is that when you left your family of origins, Methodist and very conservative church, that you found yourself in Atlanta.
I did.
Having to do some different things to support yourself, but also explore yourself. Can you tell us a little about that time?
I can. You know, love is an interesting thing. I remember being a kid and wishing I was someone else. I don't know if you've ever felt that feeling, but I felt as a child there was someone who had a better house than us. And when I didn't make the softball team citywide, I was one of 3 people that didn't make it. I wanted to be one of them. I wanted to be the football player. I even wanted to be the cheerleader. Yeah. And, you know, life presented a number of things moving forward, of even taking on an alternate personality and doing something completely different and performing on stage and being in pageants of all things. And then life took on a work role where I ended up in business suits and never feeling like I really belonged and that I really understood, and thinking that someone else had something better than I, or I aspired to be someone else, until I realized that the love I was seeking was right here. It's a wonderful thing when you can fall in love with yourself. Not because it's some weird thing, but because you realize that what you've been seeking, you had all along. But that journey that journey along the way is what brought you to that realization.
It's the Dorothy story. You've had the power all along. You had the love all
I
along.
did, and I just needed to click those red shoes together.
You had to learn it for yourself, and that's, why that story in that movie persists in all its different iterations, is because that which you are seeking is already inside of you. You look no further than your own
Yes.
heart, right? And that's such the lesson every week, whatever the challenge is that seems to be in front of me, I keep looking for the solution outside and have to go through that journey again and again. Now, one of the things you shared with us at Easter, too, was that you also had a brother who was gay.
Yes.
And that he passed, or he was sick. He was one of the first people here in San Francisco
Yes.
to be diagnosed and to succumb to HIV/AIDS.
Yeah, my brother lived here in San Francisco, and in 1985, I got a phone call from him. And in a former life, maybe a former life, I was in the medical field, and he called me and told me he had been diagnosed with bronchitis. This was 1985, living in San Francisco, and I remember my heart just fell. And 3 short days later, I got a call from his best friend telling me that my brother was in the hospital and that I better come here. And so I did, and learned that my brother was dying of AIDS. And I got to make the most difficult phone call I've ever made in my life to my parents. I mean, really conservative, closed-minded people, that I got to say, your son is gay and dying of AIDS, and if you want to say goodbye, you better come here. He was on Ward 86 5A, San Francisco General, in the early days. And I spent the last 10 days of his life with him.
You also told me a story of your parents' reactions when they came and what they did.
You know, my parents flew. It was my mother's first flight, and my father was a prankster and told my mother every time she went to the bathroom that it was actually going out the bottom of the plane. So you can imagine she was more freaked out than she started. And they got here about 2 a.m, and they came to San Francisco General, and I took them in a conference room and sat them down, and there were all sorts of pamphlets and things around that probably wasn't wise for them to pick up and read. My father would have. And so I asked them to not really read or do anything that I didn't give them, and shared with them that if I saw anything but love expressed, I would ask them to leave. And my father stood up and looked at me and said, "You can't talk to me that way." And well, I just did. And I took them to my brother's room, and they rushed past me, one to each side of his bed. And as he, with tears in his eyes, said, "I never thought you would come," my parents went to his side as my mother said, "Of course we're here. We don't care who you are, what you are. You're our son, and we love you." This was the beginning of a huge transition for them, as well as the coming days that happened in our lives.
What did you learn about love from that interaction?
I learned that love was far broader and bigger than I ever imagined. I didn't know what to expect was going to happen, and you just get cracked open wide to realize people. Don't we do it all? Don't we all do it? We know people and we think small of them, and suddenly they appear and we realize who they're really made of, and what wonderful people and human beings they are in expressing their love at a really hard time that was challenging to them.
When my lover died in 1989, he died alone and had to be autopsied, and I had the difficult call to call his parents. He was their last remaining child. Their previous 2 children had passed away before him, and I had to call him and tell them he had died. And we had a room laid out at the funeral home after he had been autopsied, just so we could have a final viewing. And it was really difficult because all the scars were visible. He was just on a paper blanket on a steel gurney. And it was difficult for me when his parents came into the room. They rushed past me, as you described. They got to each side of him, and they started kissing him and hugging him.
Yes, beautiful.
And I remember to this day the power of that love that is able to see past what we think is to the love that exists inside. They did not care about the scars. They wanted to hold their baby. And it reminds me, when you told me that story, I was so taken back to that moment.
And how beautiful it is, because most of us, I think, have had the experience to know that's not what everybody got to experience. This wasn't what we're describing, is not what happened of people being thrown out of their homes because their parents realized they were gay. You know, we didn't stop with my parents there. His best friend, who was a little wild and crazy, decided that my parents should be at the Beck's Motor Lodge. So
for those of you who don't live here in San Francisco, the Beck's is a motor lodge in the Castro that for years has been notorious. Let's just put it that way.
Yes. So my parents are at the Beck's Motor Lodge, I learn, as I'm at San Francisco General with my brother. And so after my brother made his transition, I went and joined them with a bottle of wine and a loaf of sourdough bread. My parents had never seen me drink. And I opened the bottle of the wine, and I had a glass, and as I ate some bread, and my father looked at me, and I said, "How are things going?" He said, "Well, I had to go to the Walgreens to get your mother some milk and magnesia." And I told her she would have been safer out there than me. And I only imagine what my father had experienced on his way to Walgreens and back at Beck's Motor Lodge, you know.
18th and Castro in 1985.
In 1985. Yeah,
Alan, what was that like? So, wow. Yeah, so that must have been an interesting trip, to say the least. After you left Washington, D.C., and your journey, so this is what I know about Tom, and I want to share a little bit about it. He's worked for Palm Pilot, right, when it was just Palm. MCI, after Ma Bell had been broken apart, and you started MCI. And then in early 2000s, you got a call from someone who wanted to interview you for this new company that you had never heard of, and you declined the interview.
Yeah, I was sitting at my desk and the phone rang, and I was working at Palm, and I got this phone call, and this recruiter said, "You know, we really want to talk to you about this position." And I'm going, you know, I'm like working my dream job. I have a corporate staff of 45. I have, you know, about 6,000 people I'm responsible for around the world. I'm traveling around the world. You know, I'm thinking what could be better, but I'm trying to be gracious, right? And this person says, "Well, we're from Facebook." And I said, "Well, that's really nice. You're from Facebook." I didn't know what Facebook was. Facebook was in colleges at the time. I had no idea. I said, "That's really nice. I wish you all the best at Facebook. Thank you." And I hung up the phone. And about a few hours later, a buddy of mine that I had worked with, who's a VC in the Valley, called me and said, "Tom, I referred you to Facebook and you just blew them off." And I said, "Well, Jason, you might have called me and told me, like, what is Facebook, right?" And so he asked me to go in and talk to them. And I thought, this guy's never asked me to really do anything for him, so I'm going to go do it. You want me to tell this story? So
who was it that interviewed you?
So, you know, I went to this interview, and I was in a suit, and I went to Facebook, which is over a wrap store, a sandwich store, like at the top of it, like tiny, you know. And as I walked up the stairs in a suit, I got to the top of the stairs, and there were murals all over the walls of all things of women's breasts. I came around the corner and saw liquor bottles on all these people's desks, and everyone there was young enough to be my child. And I was escorted to a conference room to meet Mark Zuckerberg, who was the ripe old age of 19. I had a suit on. Mark came in with his signature at the time, sandals, shorts, and t-shirt, kicked his sandals off, sat on this couch we were on, and put his feet up as if he was home. I finally took the jacket off. And Mark would never admit to this, but he looked at me and said, I haven't done this interviewing thing much. Could you just talk to me? And I became fascinated with the product. I knew something was going to happen with it. But most of all, I was blown away with this generation, so unlike mine, who was willing to share information. Like tell everybody everything, post everything. And so I decided that I needed to go do this adventure. And no one knew it. I guess they will now maybe, but I worked Palm and Facebook for the first 2 weeks at the same time because I couldn't get out of Palm, but I had to go to Facebook. And there went a journey on from there through, it was just colleges, and we launched in high schools, and then the news feed when Mark called me at 2 a.m. and said, they're going to picket the building tomorrow. What should I do? And I said, stay home, stay home. It's probably the best thing for you to do. Yeah.
And how many employees was Facebook at the time?
Well, not many. There were, I think, maybe 30 of us in the building.
Wow.
I was there for about 2.5 years, and by the time I left, just my team was 100, all fresh out of college, all deferring law school, business school from Harvard, Yale, Brown, Stanford, just because Facebook was in colleges. This was their dream job. And I remember Mark came to me one day and pounded his hand on the desk and said, your department's bigger than engineering. What are you going to do about it? Well, I guess I could tell everybody to go home, I'm not sure what you want me to do about it. But the company grew so fast, it was really wild.
So I love what you said, and that you were fascinated with this generation that was willing to share everything that you weren't. And what is always on the cutting edge for us is understanding in church world, right? So in spiritual community world, we're always just like, well, we want all the young kids to come. We want all the next generation to be here, but we want to keep everything the same. We want to do spiritual services like we've always done spiritual services. We want to sing the same songs from the hymnal that we've always sung from the hymnal. We want to say the same prayers and expect the new generation to come to us. But I think the really great learning and awareness you had was that this is what's emerging. Right?
Yes.
This is what's emerging in the world. How do we interact with it?
Yes.
Right? It doesn't mean that you have to totally change who you are, but you want to know what it is, right?
Yes. And it was an interesting time because Mark was 19. And I remember, I think he had turned 20, and I went to him and said, Mark, we have to do performance reviews. I'm not doing performance reviews. He said, we're not going to have those. And I said, okay, well, you could do them differently. No, we're not going to have those. I said, okay, well, one day you'll have performance reviews. And of course they did one day, and they were probably quite different. But it was a really exciting time of just tremendous ideas and young people with this just unbelievable thirst for growing and learning and just starting in their careers. And I had this great thing. I went to the 20th anniversary of a group of us that were there in the beginning. About 100 of us got together, and they came up to me, a few of them, and I felt like I was a little celebrity with them, and said, how did you put up with us? And they were now managers of people and managers of younger people and had kids of their own. I was like, how did you do that? And it was one of the greatest experiences I've had in the workforce.
Right, to have our world blown apart and our perspective shifted by the next generation is the gift of a lifetime. I witness it with my children. I witness it with the young people I encounter here at Unity. When you left Facebook to start your own consulting practice and your own business, when you left, you said something to Mr. Zuckerberg.
I did.
What was that?
Well, I told Mark that I wanted to see him in 10 years. And he said, why would you want to see me in 10 years? You're leaving. And I said, I just want to see what happens to you. I just want to see what happens to the company and come have a chat with you. And so I really didn't think much about it. And 10 years later, I was sitting at my desk and a Facebook message popped up from Mark Zuckerberg that said, do you still want to have lunch? Now, understand, at this time, Mark Zuckerberg was the fourth or fifth richest man in the world. And I kind of looked at it and thought to myself, do you really want to have lunch with one of the richest men in the world? And yeah, probably. yeah, might want to do this. And so I went to visit Mark at the office, and after unbelievable security, including when I met him, someone came and took a picture of us. Well, I thought, how great, I'm going to be in a newsletter or something. No, it was just about security, I guess, in case I did something to him or something happened. And we sat down and we talked, and I had 30 minutes with him, and we were together 45 or 50 and never touched this amazing spread of sushi that was in front of us. I, of course, went prepared, being that I was going to talk to one of the richest men in the world with some questions. And, I took one from a woman who had talked to me about a message to take to him about some of the trash that was showing up on Facebook at the time. And then I thought I should, ask a really good question. So I asked Mark Zuckerberg, what have you learned about love? It's really interesting to watch Mark, grown up, being a little uncomfortable, but he gathered himself and said to me, well, I'm married and I have kids now, and it's the most incredible. I said, no. That's not the love I want to know about. What did you learn about love in this work, in the workforce? And it was a great question and made him think, which is exactly what I wanted to do. And he shared with me about the trust that there was there of certain people, and that was love. Now, isn't trust the basis of everything? Think about that for a moment. That this company, whatever we think of it today, at that time had grown huge, and trust was one of the top things that they were focused on. And he equated trust with love.
That's beautiful. And it makes, when you told me the story, and it made me think too about this, what have we all learned about love on the spiritual journey? In every interaction I have here, it's both love and trust. I need to be trusted to handle what I need to handle, right? I need to be trusted the other person is doing their best, regardless of what they're doing, right? Because I know I am. And every moment I'm doing my best. And even at Unity Village this week, there was a lot of discussion about this and that, and it all came down to the us and them. And what we think about Facebook as an entity, and what we think about ourselves in our relationship with Facebook, and our relationships to the world, all comes down to love and trust. You shared with us that in between all of this that you've described, Palm, MCI, Facebook,
Yes.
your own 18, 19 years in a consulting practice,
Yes.
right? That you've had AIDS down to 7 T cells that you assigned to friends across the
35 years this year.
35 years that you've been HIV positive. Yeah. And still here.
I'm still here.
And that you've had 2 different cancer diagnoses.
I've had metastatic cancer for 13 years this year.
Yeah. And you're still here.
And I'm still here.
Still here. Still doing it. And all of that journey, losing your brother, losing both parents now, losing a major relationship in your life this year.
Yes.
Yeah. Divorce.
Boy, will that teach you about love.
And trust.
Yes. Yes.
So what have you learned?
You know,
About
there's
love.
there's a window over there that says love is the answer. And I stood up here and with Reverend Deanne, and the four of us stood and talked about love is the answer. And you know, whether it's gender, whether it's race, whether it's ethnicity, whether it's status, whether it's poverty, whatever it may be, love is the answer. Love is what weaves us together. Love is what brings us together. Love is what holds us together.
Have you had to love the cancer?
Yes.
How did you do that?
You know, it's an interesting thing, and I imagine you've experienced something similar where things that crack you wide open and bring you literally to your knees, that you would feel love for it. And it's such a teacher. It's such a gift. It's such what life is about. You know, I think anybody that says their life is always wonderful and just cruising along, I don't buy that. I think life really is about a rhythm. And that rhythm is, we can call it the ups and downs, the ins and outs, and how we love all parts of that. It's really easy to love the things that feel good and that are wonderful and bring us elation. But how do we find the kernels, the seeds in our pain that bring us love, that teach us things that are really immeasurable in life, about how to be in life, who we are, what we can take, what we can stand up to, what we can grow from, what we can share with others, how we can hold others in spaces. We all need that. We all need somebody to be there for us at times. And these experiences, when you allow yourself to learn from them, to learn about love in the space that doesn't always appear to be love, to know that there's love there too, is tremendous.
In the middle of death, in the middle of pain, in the middle of divorce, in the middle of sorrow, in the middle of chemo, there is love.
Yes, there is.
There is love.
There's always tomorrow. There's always, most importantly, right now. Where we've been and what has happened to us can be a teacher. It can expose us to so much. Be where you are now, looking forward. That's where the magic is.
Mr. Tom LeNoble. Thank you.